Good to see you. What's it?
Salam, hello, peace to you all. Welcome to the latest stream, the 5th edition of Iran versus Epstein Empire. Although informally we have to acknowledge that it really is axis of resistance versus Epstein Empire. And that leads us to the title of today's episode, which is Suicide by Axis of Resistance. And we have to thank Benji for that formulation. And I think we're seeing this unfold before our very eyes. And we're going to talk about that, the latest developments that are happening, and share our analysis and anti-imperialist perspective on all the latest events. This is your home for the anti-imperialist and psychological support front. So with me, as usual, we have the crew back together. We've got Indi early in the morning where he is. Indi, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. It's good to be with you guys.
Yes, wonderful to see you. And also co-host of Resistance of Fertile, along with Indi, Benji Schoendorf, anti-imperialist psychologist. Benji, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you. It's great to see you guys again. I hope we can keep this up until the sweet victory of the free people of the world.
Well, inshallah, we don't have that much longer to wait. Let's hope. Let's hope. And Professor David Yaghoubian, Iranian historian and scholar of the modern Middle East. Dave, it's great to see you again.
Good to see you guys. Hello, everyone. And hi, Alejandro. Just very cool to see students from past years in the chat. So,
oh, wow. Awesome. That is so gratifying. Well, there's a lot of, familiar faces in the chat and collaborators and colleagues. Sasha, that's very, big time difference, where he is too. So we've got quite a crew. Please do remember to like the stream so that it gets boosted a little bit and that your friends, colleagues, comrades might learn about this. You could also share it on your social media and subscribe to the channel. So we've been doing quite a few of these. If you're not always keeping up, with us, at least you'll get a notification maybe and pop in. So for some reason, I'm not streaming on Twitter, but I think
me neither. It says there's an error on Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter isn't working, I think, because they fired everybody and replaced them with AI or some dumb shit.
Yeah. Okay. So we're just on the YouTube. So
and Substack.
Yeah, and on Substack. Exactly. That is working, correct?
Yeah.
Great. So on the Resistance is Fertile podcast.substack.com. We are streaming there as well. So we welcome everybody, however it is that you're finding it. Well, okay. We've got suicide by axis of resistance. So let's turn to the psychologist about, to try and get some insight into the kind of conditions and motivations and manifestations of suicide before we return to the manner in which this is happening, by axis of resistance. But, how do we find ourselves in this place? How is the empire, in the position of, seeking, whether it consciously or unconsciously. I know that's, like terms of art, but I'm just trying to use it in a basic way, seeking suicide here.
Yeah. Well, there's two ways to look at it, right? The first one is I'm going to go on a kind of clinical psychologist spiel. And many people, of course, I wouldn't say it's my bread and butter, but I see many people who have suicidal thoughts. I mean, it turns out actually about 50% of the a normal population. That was done in the Seattle area. So, normal as far as that population can be said normal, but 50% of the population in a survey said, like that's normal population, that they considered for at least 2 weeks in their life that suicide would be the rational solution to their problem, right? So suicide is a extremely human experience, and even more so thoughts of suicide. In fact, I think the humans are, so far as we know, the only animals that commit suicide, not in the sense that they do something that kills them, but in the sense that they plan a suicide. And as a clinical psychologist, a lot of the work I do with people who produce suicidal ideation is some version of normalization, because, there's a very long distance between saying, I want to die, and actually doing the thing. And of all the people who think that dying might be a solution to their problems, really a very small minority ever do something about it. They tend to be men, they tend to be kind of isolated men, they tend to be, men who have serious difficulties with their self-esteem, their image of themselves. That is very common. And one population that is at particular danger of committing suicide is those who stop saying they're going to commit suicide, right? So they're not telling you they're planning to commit suicide. In fact, they're telling you exactly the opposite. They're telling you they got their life back in order at last. They found a way to solve their problems. They're going to be winning. And in fact, they're going to be winning so much that, you're going to be tired of winning, and you're going to tell them, please stop, we've won too much. And they'll say, no, we're going to win again. And those people are the ones that, are suicide risks. And they're kind of the terror of clinical psychologists, because they fly under the radar. And the only way to know if they really are suicidal is not to listen to what they say at that point, is to really look at what they do. And so this white empire, this Epstein Empire, hasn't actually come to the idea that the solution to its problems, and in fact to most of the rest of the world's problems, would be for itself to put itself, voluntarily out of its misery. But it is, when you look at its actions, doing absolutely everything to commit suicide. And so that's a very US concept, because, in the US, the police is the most lethal thing you're likely to encounter this side of a AR-15 machine gun. And there is this concept that is known as a suicide by cop, right? So I don't know if it's really a clinical psychology concept, but basically, someone in some interaction with the police will do something which, according to police reports later on, made inevitable that they would get shot by the police. And so when you put these two things together and you look at the actions of white empire, in fact, for the past, at least since it pushed Russia into that Ukraine operation, you are really looking at a ruling class with a death wish. And it's finally come to the point where it couldn't put an end to its misery in any other way. So it went rushing headlong into Iran. And Iran, just like the cop, told them how many times have we, brothers and sisters, heard Professor Morandi on television telling everybody who would listen, the guy is a saint. He's been doing 20 podcasts a day for the past 6 months at least, and telling everybody exactly what will happen. We have weapons you have no idea about. We can hit you as we want. We have you all in our crosshairs. We are going to close the Strait of Hormuz. The price of petrol is going to go through the roof. We will hit all the your satrapies in the Gulf. all of this will happen. And White Empire went, oh yeah, really? Well, let me punch you in the face. So that's, I would surmise, using also some of my clinical psychology background, is what can legitimately be called suicide by axis of resistance. What say you, brothers?
Wow. Interesting remarks. I guess what I'm impressed by, and maybe I don't know if this builds on what you're saying or is just a different kind of angle on it, but I would think that there is a certain kind of death instinct. We've seen how much this empire is based on the suppression of and the killing of others, and the death is so much a part of what makes it function in the way that it does. That might seem a paradox for there to be a suicidal kind of death instinct, but I think there is something that maybe happens or changes when the conditions of empire start consciously, that it's possible to see that it's in decline, is that there's a projection, which is something you see the Israelis have, a lot of, which maybe is similar to the U.S. as well, which is projecting onto the other its own suppressed fears about what it has done, and the fear that they will be the object of the same violence and death, sowing of death that they have themselves depended on for their miserable kind of artificial lives. And there's another component of it, which is that the decline leads to a recognition that there may be a possibility that you would have to live as equals under some kind of law of reciprocity, something I want to talk about a lot more tonight, but a law of reciprocity where the other's value is equal to yours. And if you are a culture and a society that is totally formed around supremacy, that is an extremely frightening kind of prospect. And what we're learning is that people in the Epstein Empire or in the settler colony really cannot deal with the idea of having to adjust to such a world and to such a reality. And they would rather either die themselves or kill you in the same, like take everybody down, like, and destroy themselves. So I feel like that's one component of it. And I would just think that it's worth contrasting suicide versus martyrdom. Like, what's the difference between these two things? Suicide is, as Benji, you were explaining, it's a kind of pathology that emerges from various sorts of conditions. Martyrdom, however, I see as very life-affirming. And it is because it is done for a higher sort of purpose, not out of some sense of personal feeling of failure or insufficiency that makes life unbearable and should just be ended. It is for the life of others that you would give and sacrifice yourself. So martyrdom is a really very different kind of experience of, where sometimes somebody may be a martyr. In the case we were talking about, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, that he seemed to have been rather aware that this was a real possibility, and the choice to stay working in his office in the course of the bombardment rather than seeking protection was a conscious one that one could logically conclude was very likely to lead to his death. That's still, however, the opposite of suicide, right? Because the motivations that led him to identify with his people and to set them an example are totally different from the kind of failed narcissism of suicide, I guess. I'm wondering what other people think about, Then we can also talk a little bit about, how this is happening. I think that's good. And whether this is an apt, is the empire sort of plunging itself into its own destruction and accelerating that, as we've sort of said before, but we could talk also more about that. But I just am interested in what else people want to say in terms of this kind of framing that we've chosen for this beginning point of the departure point of the episode.
David, you want to go ahead or should I?
You're unmuted.
You're muted. You're muted.
But you're unmuted, so maybe.
There we go. Yeah. So having myself, and thank you for that perspective, both of you, which I don't have myself. So I learned a lot just now. But one thing I didn't learn recently was the power of the Iranian military, which is something that I've been aware of for several decades, and especially listening to folks who have essentially insider knowledge and connections, such as Dr. Mohammed Marandi. It's been clear to me for years. I mean, let's go back 23 years even to the most expensive war game ever produced by the Department of Defense, now the Department of War of the United States, 2002 Millennium Challenge, in which the American Navy did station itself in the Persian Gulf with its big ass aircraft carrier. And within the first 5 hours, 20,000 Americans were dead. The US had lost, and the Department of Defense stopped the game, put reset on the video game, literally refloated the ships and forced Iran to fight fair. So I've been teaching for the last, 23 years about Millennium Challenge 2002, which nobody, when I do my unofficial poll, how many of you have heard of Millennium Challenge 2002? The $250 million war game in which Iran won and killed 20,000 Americans in the first 5 hours. And they're just like, as jaw agape as when I tell them about Operation Northwoods, 1962. Anyway, so there's a couple of real teachable moments there. But so I've been well aware, and this is one of the reasons why I've been one of the voices, incorrect voices, like arguing that the U.S. won't do it. There's got to be somebody in the back room that knows that this would be suicide. And as I've probably mentioned, I happen to have been on Press TV Live when the 12-day war started in June. I was talking about something else, and all of a sudden the bomb started falling, and the anchor said, whoa, it's on. And Dr. Yaghoubian, your thoughts. And my first thought was basically, and I have the MP4 of it. The apartheid state of Israel and the United States of America are now committing suicide by Iran. That was my first reaction. Now, they didn't complete their effort, if you will, in the 12-day war. And as we saw, Trump and Netanyahu came out and proclaimed this amazing obliterative victory. And it was so awesome, and it was so perfect, and it was so wonderful. And yay, team. And isn't that amazing? When Yaghoubian had been talking about dark clouds and 20,000 dead Americans and from Operation Millennium Challenge 2002, nobody died in the great blowout Iran-US war. So this is when I basically concluded that it's not happening. I guess they called the suicide hotline, and it told them to and that was the IRGC, which informed Israel after 12 days, as we're seeing now, that it's going to be out of interceptors and is being pummeled. I'll finish in just a second there, Benji. So basically, this is it. Not only is this not like new to me, I'm just again stunned that the United States and Israel were willing to do this. The mainstream media has facilitated the inability for Americans, and I believe Israelis, because of the censorship there, to understand what's actually going on, both what was going on in between the 12-day war and now, and what's actually going on now. And so there's going to be some absolutely brutal hangovers, and I think they're going to be like waking up to those hangovers, or are beginning to think we'll be talking about the combined tag team gangbang of Hezbollah and the IRGC this evening. And so they're only ramping up their pressure, the response to the illegal Zionist American aggression. And last, I'll just close and say, everybody who is trained in the West and in Israel to think that we start wars, we kill people, we massacre kids and bomb hospitals, and then we decide when to call a ceasefire, and then of course we don't abide by that ceasefire, we break it 15,000 fucking times. Yeah, this time is different actually, because Trump's talking about, oh, it's so cool and we're done and everything, and you're going to be done when the IRGC says that you're going to be done. And apparently the IRGC and the Iranian nation have a long list of things that are going to be required before they are done. So I think also people need to wake up to the fact that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu aren't actually in the driver's seat. And so in a way, they're like those little kids in the back of the car with that plastic steering wheel. You know, they sell them on Amazon and at Toys R Us. It hooks over the seat and they sit in the back seat and they pretend that they're driving, but they're not really driving. That's actually Donald Trump and Bibi right now.
Thank you, guys. I've actually learned a lot from these different perspectives. I'd just like to add a few quotes to the suicide subject. So this is Aimé Césaire. He says, "No one colonizes innocently, that no one colonizes with impunity either, that a nation which colonizes, that a civilization which justifies colonization and therefore force, is already a sick civilization, a civilization which is morally diseased, which irresistibly, progressing from one consequence to another, one denial to another, calls for its Hitler. I mean, its punishment." And there was a good quote in the comments, which we put up, that praises Sunset Ho Chi Minh, called suicide the poison of individualism, turning alienation inwards instead of outwards against systems. We can call this, I guess, imperiocide, because the system itself is trying to kill itself. Another quote I want to do is Clausewitz. I was reading this just like, think about theory of war, and Clausewitz was racist, but that's important. In his accusations here, I think, are a confession. He says savage people are ruled by passion, civilized people by the mind. He said, if then civilized nations do not put their prisoners to death or devastate cities and countries, it is because intelligence plays a larger part in their methods of warfare and has taught them more effective ways of using force than the crude expression of instinct. And the final thing is, this is something from the Quran that I've always kind of struggled with, because the Quran is always talking about how God has led some people astray, or their hearts have been led astray by God. I'm like, why would God do that? But this is a prayer, this is from Yunus, where this is from Moses. It says, Moses prayed, "Our Lord, you have bestowed upon Pharaoh and his nobles pomp and wealth in the present life, whereby they lead people astray from your path. Our Lord, destroy their riches and harden their hearts, so that they shall not believe until they are faced with a grievous punishment." So that's an idea which I still don't fully understand, but it's the idea that you kind of like want your enemy to be retarded. And that God sort of like leads some people astray. But if you look at it in like in a karmic sense, like in Hinduism, there is that very real concept. Like here, our big story is Rama versus Ravana. But then there's also a version where if you zoom out, Ravana was doing like what he had to do based on his like past things he'd done in this past to sort of like keep the cycle going forward. So Rama was kind of like doing him a favor by killing Ravana. And then Ravana was also doing Rama a favor by doing what he had to do. I think when I talk to a lot of civilians, they're like, oh, this war is so bad, I wish it would stop. And I don't feel like that. I feel like there's like justice happening, like it has to happen. And I think this civilization has been calling, they tried to make Hitler their antichrist. They tried to put all their sins on Hitler to excuse everything the British did and everything the French did and everything the Americans and everything they kept doing. And now it's time for it to come home for them. And I think Iran is doing a favor by putting them out of their misery.
I think there was already a sign of the suicidal impulse, if you like. I really put it down to supremacy. It's not a clinical suicidal impulse. I'm not really into, like kind of death wish, dark psychoanalytic analysis. It's more really like garden variety, white supremacy. You get to a point where you cannot conceive of the possibility that brown people can be just as smart as you because you don't consider them as people, right? And it really molds the mind. And there was a sign of this in the Millennium Challenge war game, because the guy who was running the Iranian side, I think they pulled him. He was a retired general, and he started using completely unconventional tactics, swift bows, and all the rest of it. And they stopped the game. They stopped the war game, and then they changed the rules. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that, you know, so you have to fight with your good arm tied behind your back and on one leg, so that they could win. And that in itself was already, you know, a portentous sign that they might well do it, because instead of saying, oh my God, we're getting our backsides handed to us by, you know, people we call names that I won't repeat on screen. Back to the drawing boards, guys. No, that they didn't do that. They went, no, we'll just make sure the other side does it our way, i.e. the way we project them to do it, that stupid way that non-humans are always going to do, right? And there is this thing, it's baked into the white supremacy. It's even in the doctrine of aerial bombing, right? Like there was this guy on Daniel Davis's show, is a top scholar of bombing war, right? He spends all his days talking, somebody knows his name, to 4-star generals, and he has studied it, and he said, and he's a very careful scholar, right? So he says, I have studied it every single time. It has never happened that you could change a government, change a country to aerial bombing. It has never happened. So it doesn't mean it will never happen, of course, but it has never happened. And I've had this conversation with these 4-star generals for the past 20, 30 years, and at West Point and everywhere. And every time they hear what I'm saying and they go, yeah, but let's tweak this little thing. Let's change this little rule here. Let's do it that way, right? And he actually talks about the precision strike trap, where you think you can just decapitate the enemy and it will be over. And they have no notion that, you know, they should know when Hitler randomly bombed London during the Blitz, it made all of the English population actually rally around the flag and be more united than it probably had been and has been since, right? But they can't conceive it will be the same for brown people, because they really imagine brown people are as they write them in the Hollywood films. This is what it really is. And then when you get to a mafia state, you know, a deep state, a kind of double government, completely enmeshed with mafia, organized crimes, who these guys are not, you know, they're not deep intellectuals, let's be honest. Then they only think about the power of violence on people who are afraid of them. And they just can't imagine that there are other civilizations than their own in the world. They can't imagine all these things. So at the end of the day, it's really suicide by white supremacy, but it's not suicide in the traditional sense, because they don't mean to die, but they're going to die. And I will conclude those remarks by something I saw today. I didn't know, and we have 2 historians here, so maybe you can put some meat on those bones. But apparently there was this Roman general named of Crassus, was it 25 BC, who was a member of the wealthy elite. He made his money, believe it or not, in shady real estate deals. He was driven by greed, and he went, Rome is the strongest nation. We have the strongest army. We're going to go after, not even the Persians, because at the, you know, it wasn't really called Persia at the time. So let's call them Iran and the Iranians, right? Same place, same thing. Nobody in Rome was interested in the war. There was absolutely no popular support for the war. And he went there, and to his surprise, I mean, you know, it was the Romans, so at least they kind of walked the walk. Huh? He went to fight the Iranians, and discovered to his surprise at the first battle that, those guys look much stronger than I imagined. And if you want to go back to the pictures of Trump, you know, the first day when he was winning, as he told us today, right? And he started saying, no, that's okay. They'll run out of arrows soon, because, I mean, I don't know, why does history does that to us? You know, the Romans were very good at kind of hand-to-hand combat, and they had these defensive formations, but it was really, chopping the other guy up with your sword. But the Iranians, you know what they were good at? Archery and shooting arrows. So, it was pretty effective because you didn't have to go to engage in hand-to-hand combat with the Roman legions. You could smoke them from a distance. But what did Crassus say? Crassus said, "Nah, don't worry, they'll run out of arrows very soon." To nobody's surprise, he got his ass whooped by the brave and good strategic thinking of the Iranian armies. And what happened to Crassus? He was captured by the Iranians, and he was put to death by being forced to drink molten gold. Is there a lesson in here for somebody? I think it's Karl Marx, right? First as a tragedy, next as a farce.
It's fascinating. So I've been reading Clausewitz just for some basic theory brush up, and I think it comes back to what you're saying, where they see brown people as subhuman. So he says war is nothing but a duel on a larger scale. Countless duels go to make up a war, but a picture as a whole can be formed by imagining a pair of wrestlers. Each tries through physical force to compel the other to do his will. His immediate aim is to throw his opponent in order to make him incapable of further resistance. But if you think about duels, and I guess I'm referencing Barry Lyndon or whatever here, but if you think about duels, they're between gentlemen, which is white gentlemen, obviously. You don't have a duel with a native. You don't have a duel with a woman. You don't have a duel with people that you consider beneath you. And so you can see that all these rules of war, I could see with the sinking of the Dana off Sri Lanka's coast, that the Geneva Conventions don't apply to non-white people. Yeah. Because they sunk that unarmed ship full of a marching band, and then they also left us to clean up the bodies and to save the people. And you can see that we're beneath whatever rules of duels that they have amongst each other. But then the fascinating thing here is, I don't know when I became so religious here, but within Hindu stories, right? Every person, every demon, let's say, that gets power, they always leave some loophole out of their arrogance. So I think Ravana, his thing was I couldn't be killed by a woman. So then someone reincarnated as a woman and no, he said I couldn't be killed by human. Or someone would say I couldn't be killed by, they were just someone they considered beneath them, so they never included it in their protections. And then that is what undoes them. So I think finally, you could say with Vietnam, you could say with Afghanistan, you could say those were losses. But I think what we're seeing here is a strategic defeat in that it changes the world. It's not just America getting kicked out of Iran, just like they got kicked out of Vietnam, just like they got kicked out of Afghanistan. They're getting kicked out of an entire region, and their bases are getting dismantled to the point that they cannot wage war there anymore in the future. And they're facing a strategic defeat. And it's because of their superiority complex, because they didn't know their enemy, and because they don't really know themselves. And it's like every demon in sort of Hindu mythology. They always leave some loophole through their arrogance, and that is what undoes them.
If I might just take off from that brilliantly articulated point, Gore Vidal, and I quoted Gore, but the other day, and I saw it again, and I misquoted him because it's the United States of amnesia, where history begins on Monday. I had said the United States of America, where history begins on Monday, which is essentially the same thing. But let's just think about that. I would say, and I'll get to this in just a second, but it's not necessarily these days, and I've got something heartening to reference, but of necessarily the American people and their amnesia. But let's just talk for a minute about the amnesia of our mainstream media by design, and our, say, government institutions, and if you want to call them elites, and the military. To kind of frame this, Scott Ritter tells a story frequently, and some of you might have heard him tell this story about how after the first Gulf War, when he was assessing the bomb damage in Iraq, and this is part of the standoff weapon, or the what was it called? What was, Benji, the trap,
Relation trap?
smart munition trap or something,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That, we have a video and we hit that building, therefore X that out and that's done, and we can now cross that off the inventory, and the president can say we destroyed X amount of whatever. So Scott Ritter was visiting all of these sites and finding out that the building was destroyed, but it was basically an empty building. And the Iraqis that were taking him around kind of had these smiles on their faces. And one of the guys said to him, you know what? You guys build bombs and drop bombs really good. You know what we do really good? We pour concrete really good. And so now Scott remembers this, and the Iraqis remember this, and the Iranians remember the Iraqi experience, and they have, acted accordingly. You know who forgets? The racists in the American military and our political establishment. I don't know if it's the lower ranks, but in the upper ranks, it just goes to their head. And so they are essentially repeating their same air power mistakes that go, all the way back, you could say, to Jimmy Doolittle, but certainly to the Second World War, the failed B-29 campaign before the advent of the atomic bomb. And so clearly they have forgotten the historical lessons that Iran has just been aggregating over the decades and now unleashing back in their face. But this is the heartening note is, I think everyone has seen, and especially if you're in California, this announcement that there might be sleeper cells of Iranians, maybe in Highland, California, that guy Yaghoubian, we got to be careful. And what has been so heartening for me to see, and certainly it's algorithmic because it's the things that I see, but every single post that I've seen related to one of these threats, it basically states I ain't buying that, because if anything happens, it's going to be Mossad or the American government. I saw one that was pretty profound. I think I sent it to some of you guys actually, and it was someone that said, if there's an attack here on our population and the Iranian government denies it, I'm going to believe them and not our government. And it had 20,000 likes, right? So clearly people are aware of the history of, I mentioned Operation Northwoods, the 1962 false flag plan to kill Americans so that we could legitimate an attack on Cuba, right? People are aware of this. I see some people in the chat, I saw that, people are aware. I whenever in any context that I can in any class, I let my students know about things like Operation Northwoods or the Lavon Affair, Operation Susanna. So that is truly heartening, I have to say. So I guess I could conclude and say, that those that remember history aren't necessarily doomed to repeat it or to hear its rhyme. But we're seeing just in the United States of amnesia that the particularly the Fox News coverage. I've actually been having some belly laughs about this because the people who are watching that are going to have the most brutal hangover. The shit that they are seeing relative to what's going on, the way that the narratives are being spun and manipulated, and the graphics, and they're reliving their fantasy from the first Gulf War before most of those boomers bow out. And so it's one last goon session in front of the TV with all the commercials and the makeup and the nice studios. And enjoy it while you can, which is maybe just another 24 to 48 hours before.
Yeah, it's last. Yeah, it's last call at the cable TV Coliseum. That's what I said.
Yeah, I was interested in those remarks about the exemption of global South people, Black and brown people, from the kind of universal laws, right, and the protections, simply because obviously these rules are not meant for them. And if we think about how did the international legal system actually emerge, and for what reason? I mean, it really had to do with trying to control competition between colonial, imperial systems, right? To make sure that we don't have another great war. So let's get the League of Nations, because this is devastating and destructive to, Western hegemony and supremacy over the rest of the world if we compete and fight with one another too much. So let's recognize one another and recognize certain limits. But then, those exceptions, of course, aren't necessarily going to apply, even if the rhetoric and the language is universalist to everyone else that actually was considered subhuman, in the racialist and supremacist theories of the past. And so it's interesting to see where the exceptions are, right? So the ICC, as I forget who said it, but one kind of UN official or world leader, or a politician from Europe, I can't remember if it was a French politician or somebody, basically said, listen, the ICC is not, it's for African dictators and, people like this. It's not for, i.e. Netanyahu or war criminals, of the white empire, of the Epstein Empire. So we have exceptions that the protections don't apply to people of global South, but the punitive components of the international system only apply to, peoples of the global South. And so that, is a kind of hypocrisy. So if we're seeing the end of the international system, as long as it's not replaced by the Board of Peace, which is essentially a mechanism for reviving the Dutch East India Company, the East India Company, the Hudson Bay Company, the era of these mercantilist colonial private ventures, which is essentially what the Board of Peace is meant to do in a certain way, though trying to get governments to invest, which is actually in a way sort of what ended up happening also with like the British Empire sort of taking over the activities of the private company, East India Company. So that's, we're at the moment where, we could really say, is the UN on the cusp of collapse? And why not, collapse it when it does what it did today? And I think, Benji, you were interested in this story as well. Yeah. And I think sent me a link to it with the vote in the UN Security Council sponsored by a motion from Bahrain to sanction, Iran for its counterattacks on other countries in the Gulf that are characterized as non-combatants, which begs the question, well, so is Iran just crazy, irrational that it would, and of course that fits into the narrative that it is a theocratic, irrational state, and it would, what's it doing, like this, but notably, it passed because 2 of the permanent members, and we saw the same thing in the Board of Peace. The Board of Peace passed because 2 of the permanent members abstained rather than voted against. And I have some questions about why maintain this system.
Yeah,
you're going to allow.
Wait, please clarify for me, even because I missed this, guys. So much coming in. Wait, tell me. So because Sergei Lavrov dressed down the Arabs so hard the other day on this. Yeah. So are you telling me that not only did they still take it to the UN, but then it passed because China and Russia fucking abstained?
Yes,
right.
Yes.
Fill me in. Wow.
I would like to say something about this.
Go ahead,
So, Indi mentioned earlier, something out of Greek tragedy, right? It's this Greek concept of hubris, right? And it's basically he who the gods wants to destroy, they make crazy first, right? And this is really the point at which white empire has happened. It's run its course, like 500 years. It's running on fumes. It's running on, basically snorting its own supremacist farts, and there is nothing left. So, but there's an element of Greek tragedy in it because everything it does hastens its demise. Absolutely every single thing. So, for example, the United Nations. Well, let me tell you, brothers and sisters, good riddance to the United Nations, because from its inception, the UN actually granted special dispensation to the Zionist entity. On paper, the Zionist entity was granted membership of the United Nations on absolute condition that it grant the right of return to Palestinian refugees. That was the sine qua non condition on paper. And the minute it entered the United Nations, it just, set fire to that commitment. And the UN never held the Zionist entity to account on it. So from the beginning, from the inception of this thing called the United Nations, based on occupied native land in the OG of all genocidal settler colonies on the island of Manhattan, there was inside the UN, inside its function, this exception for the Chosenite Zionist colony. And what happened during the movement from genocide to a Holocaust in Gaza following the Tufan al-Aqsa offensive was at one point the collective Biden, as they used to call that guy who, I don't think he was, he was at lunch all day, let's put it that way, out to lunch. And finally, they abstained on a ceasefire resolution. And that was a little bit after, by the way, the genocidal Zionist representative, theatrically with a little shredder bought on Temu, I think, shredded the UN Charter. Right, so they got special dispensations, and the play, the narrative arc that would please my comrade, my brother Sina, they eventually spread it. And then the vote passes, the US abstains, and not 5 minutes later, what was her name, Thomas or something, Lynn Thomas, this, they put people of color to do their dirty work. That's what they like to do. And she declared that this was non-binding resolution. So in that moment, the whole system collapsed. It's a non-binding resolution. So what is it? A talking shop. It's like the Oxford Union or the Cambridge Union. You debate a subject with great animation, and at the end, whichever way the vote goes, nobody knows, nobody cares because it's non-binding. Nobody even remembers. But that non-binding was the first major nail in the UN coffin, right? And then what was the second? Board of Peace. And what is the third? Today's vote. And brothers and sisters, why should we get so excited that Russia and China abstained? You know what an abstention means today from the permanent members of the Security Council? An abstention doesn't mean I agree. An abstention means I stand this decision as non-binding. That's what it actually means. So for China, for Russia, for the AOR, these people are Sun Tzu. They have learned about the enemy. The White Empire projects on the enemy that they are not human, but the other side studies the enemy long and hard. And put another nail in it. Come on, bring some more. What are they going to do? The Gulf countries come, they get humiliated publicly by Lavrov, who says, you're so hypocritical, and they go home with their UN Security Council resolution. Oh, great. So you have your resolution now. You know what? I suggest you use it to protect yourself from Shahed drones. Maybe you can take 20, 40, put it like this and see how well it works, because what's going to happen? Oh yeah, I know. The US is going to enforce the resolution by doing what? Oh yeah, by maybe threatening to bomb Iran. So you see, the whole thing is collapsing, and what is happening is the people, the adults in the room, are just saying, well, we're not getting involved in that game. We're not going to fight you for a vote that means nothing. We're just going to stay on the sidelines, so that all your little satrapies, all your little flying monkeys, when they see, and everybody feels it wobbling, that it finally collapses, we'll open the door to them. Hey, how about this Shanghai Security Cooperation Organization that's all about security and fighting terrorism? How about this? How about that? And let the crazies on Manhattan do what they will. The whole thing anyway isn't financed.
I would just like to sort of at least reflect on that, if not problematize it, by just saying, if indeed, as you say, why should anybody like I just did maybe get upset that China and Russia abstained if that's in their 4D chess? Iran can take it. Like we're taking it pretty good, but you know who can't? Gaza, when they're being fucking genocided. And so, for example, to say that, hey, why get your panties in a twist when China and Russia validate the Board of Peace? That just extends the genocide of the Palestinians. And so I don't know, actually, had Russia or China vetoed, if we'd necessarily be in a better, the Palestinians of Gaza who are being genocided on a daily basis would be in a better situation. But that is why I think many of us were up in arms and remain up in arms about the validation that, I mean, you know, the subtlety, Benji, that, oh, hey, you know, by standing aside, it really means that it's, you know, it's with reservations. But for all intents and purposes, until Iran busted out the Shahab missiles, it's the Board of Peace with Tony fucking Blair, dude. So I think that China and Russia, unfortunately, you said it, man. It's the configuration of the permanent five, the P5 in the Security Council, which any way you slice it. I mean, one could argue, for example, I was if you will, supportive of the SMO because I had watched the West shove NATO up Russia's ass against its promises for about 30 years. And so I was actually, wow, that's kind of cool that Russia has a veto right now because they can just veto that shit and go and take care of business. But when it's, you know, the United States repeatedly vetoing the world community because they want to stop the genocide, I'm not as happy with the veto. Point being, the permanent five veto over the globe is really, I think, the biggest problem. If you could get rid of that, perhaps the United Nations could in some ways be saved. And I would say, before we're going to be really quick to throw out the United Nations, we'd better have something to replace it with, because as far as I know, and people can school me if there's something else, it's really all we have as a metric. And so unless we want to just not refer to any international law because, well, fuck the UN and international law because it doesn't work, then we truly are in the law of the jungle. Now, with that said, we have been in the law of the jungle, and that's why for a couple of years I've been saying this isn't going to come down to anything that the P5 or the E3 or the EU3 are going to do. It's going to come down to the amount of Shahab missiles that the Islamic Republic of Iran can create. But nevertheless, I don't think we should be quick to just diss on and dismiss the UN, because the only thing that we're going to have to replace it in the short term is going to be things like the Board of Peace and then the whatever, maybe the BRICS board. And I think at that point, we're actually in more danger than we would be if we weren't somehow reforming the United Nations, which, as far as I know, is the only institution which brings together the roughly 194 countries that are identified.
May I make a point about this?
Okay.
Oh.
Okay.
Well, let me say one thing. Like, we haven't been in the law of the jungle. We've been in the law of what white people call civilization. That's
Right.
what it's been. So in the law of the jungle, there's a basic sense of self-preservation. Like, my cat just attacked me, sorry. But like, so these cats, right? Like, when they fight, they have like a somewhat standard threat display. So they'll threaten each other before they do something. And then based on that, so that's what Iran was doing in the 12-day war. They were like, we have these claws, like, don't get near these claws. And then America ignored that. So the law of the jungle, I think, will be an improvement on whatever this is, because as far as I can see, with, let's say, the Genocide Convention in 1948, that didn't stop genocide. It just seems like they copyrighted it. It seems like we have the copyright to genocide now. We can do it forever in Israel. And I think we're in a post, like, international law, just even that phrase itself is a deception, because it's not international law. It's Western law applied to other people and not to them. And it's this idea that we are beneath. It's a rule for people for duelers, and it's only for gentlemen, and it's not for natives. It's not for women. It's not for anybody else. So, I mean, I understand. I think that's a good point Benji makes about abstaining being like we consider this non-binding.
But just to your point, David, I think it's a really important point. There has to be rules. We need a place where we can resolve international disputes, and that place needs to be a level playing field. It needs to be a place in which the common humanity of everybody is recognized. There is actually such a place already emerging, and it's called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, right, where people meet for security issues. Countries meet for that. But the one thing I've been saying, and it's very important to understand it because it's been hidden from us for 80 years is, you could even say, and future historians will say it, that the United Nations was nothing but a Zionist enabling fig leaf. That's what it was. I mean, from its inception, it let in dismember on a promise that it was never held to, and then it spent the next 80 years disregarding all binding resolutions of the Security Council. I mean, there's the 242. What did that give? So the United Nations in 80 years did not do jack anything to protect the Palestinians. In fact, I will go further. It allowed the slow-paced genocide of the Palestinian population by putting a veneer of international law, international legitimacy on top of it. Look at the UN today. Who are the representatives of the Palestinians in the UN? There are people who would make Marshal Pétain from my homeland of France look like Che Guevara is who they are, right? So the whole thing is an absolute disgusting farce. And the Chinese, the Russians are another kettle of fish, but the Chinese are basically saying, no, the rules are good. The rules of the United Nations are perfect. They're good rules, but there must be laws that apply to everybody. There must not be, the rule-based order, which is this new concept that, when was that invented? They took it out, no, I was going to say of their hat, but out of their backside about 7, 8 years ago. I'd never heard of this phrase before, and suddenly it was not international law anymore. It was the rules-based order, meaning we make the rules and you take orders, right? And we is the whiteys, and you know who you are. So the whole thing was a sham from day one. It was the only game in town, all the rest of it. But as regards the Palestinian population, I'm sorry to say, if this thing could not stop 8 Hiroshima bomb in terms of explosive power to be dropped on Gaza, does anybody in the world believe that even if there had been veto on this board of peace, Trump wouldn't have done his, Sharm el-Sheikh ritual collective humiliation of his satrapies, and wouldn't have sent Jared Kushner and the GHF and all the rest of it in Gaza? I mean, I don't see a world. The only thing that could have stopped it would have been United Nations troops going into Gaza. And that's literally getting your psychopathic frog that's not yet totally boiled to throw its nuclear toys out of the pram. And if it's not, it's the calculation that the adults in the room made. And I don't pretend to know the calculation better than them. Because please don't give me those calculations to make.
Yeah,
I know the UN guy in Sri Lanka, and we go to some of the same kids' birthday parties, and these are just the new colonial administrators. It's not some impartial institution. He's from Quebec, actually.
Yeah, I guess the only thing, since I also said that the history of these institutions are basically, they don't have the purpose of really providing peace and security and respecting universally human rights. They're part of the colonial construct. But then one might sort of ask for some consistency also from Russia and China in how they engage with that institution. Perhaps they're not yet ready to unveil the Shanghai Cooperation Council's charter. But, at the most recent that the Munich Peace Conference, I did a little analysis of 3 speeches: the Davos speech of Carney, Marco Rubio's Munich Peace and Munich Security Conference, his call for the recolonization of the world on behalf of Western Christian civilization. So, he also said, UN is totally a bankrupt institution. Maybe we'll use it sometimes when it does what we want, but we have no regard for it. But it was the Chinese, foreign minister Wang Yi, who made a passionate, well, I wouldn't say passionate, but a very sober kind of appeal that the UN Charter is the document that is most legitimate in the world because, like, all these countries have ratified it, and so it has a kind of standing. And even with all the ineffectiveness, we should bolster this institution and work, with international, norms, and maybe they have to be kind of improved so that they would actually, and the institution be improved so that it would actually be used to encourage diplomacy and prevent war. But I feel like, maybe it's time that if they're going to say this is an illegitimate decision by abstaining rather than just suppressing it and vetoing it, then I think it's time to say that that this institution isn't legitimate, and that we need to put something that maybe preserves some of the universalist kind of concepts and ideas, but in a structure that actually expresses the will of the people, the free peoples of the world, right? So that's what I would want and expect, is a little bit more ideological leadership and institution building, not just in terms of building the economic kind of conditions for this sort of cooperation, but also starting to do some of the work in terms of building political institutions and having an ideological plan, and be more clear and direct about that. That's what we're aiming for, I think.
Yeah. I think if you look at it quite bloodlessly, though, or bloodily, depending on your perspective, what's happening in Iran, for example, China is able to clear THAAD batteries out of Korea without firing a shot. And Russia is able to finance its war and get sanctions relieved on itself without firing a shot. So if you look at it quite, I guess, real politically or whatever, like, are they interested in stabilizing this world order? Not terribly. And if their enemy is bleeding out in the Middle East rather than bleeding them out, is that in their interest? Yeah.
No, yeah. I completely understand that if we sort of remove ourselves from kind of anti-imperialist, Marxist kind of ideology and just go back to great power conflict and great power, and we could be neo-realists, and why don't we have John Mearsheimer on the show and he can explain all of that for us. But you know what that doesn't do? It doesn't protect the people of Gaza, and it doesn't protect the people of Iran. We're saying you're on your own. So small countries like you, even though you're linchpins, in a global South, kind of order that could emerge, we're ready to sacrifice you too for our, great power interests. And I don't find that reasonable or acceptable at this point.
But one thing I get from the resistance is they don't ask for help like that.
No, they don't.
They don't.
I'm not saying that the resistance is asking for the help. I'm saying, are you actually going to be leaders and be in solidarity? What does solidarity mean? It means more than, I think, just sort of looking at your great power interests. And it's time for some ideological work that needs to be done to really rip this empire to shreds and provide a vision of an alternative, so that the people who are sitting on the sidelines because they're too afraid of the violence of the empire, being emboldened to know now is our time and our opportunity. We have to act. I mean, I wish we had a strong left movement in the imperial core that was putting pressure, but this was a very interesting thing stated by the Spanish, Pedro Sanchez, when he, today they announced that they were removing their ambassador and reducing their diplomatic relations with Israel. And of course, there have been many things that they've done, on this path, including the arms embargo and, a week or 2 weeks ago, refusing to, let U.S., kind of use of their kind of ports and facilities for its war on Iran. But what he said something about that I thought was very beneficial in this context, which he said, we've reached the point where we can't, because we fear the consequences against us, we can't use that as an excuse not to do what's right, when we see this terrible crime taking place. And so that's a bit of ideological leadership that is, it's moralistic, and maybe that's not always going to work with every kind of community. But I really appreciated that he identified the problem, is that everyone is, in the global system is afraid that if they stand up and take this opportunity now to show solidarity with Iran or with the people of Palestine and Gaza or Venezuela or Cuba, that they will then become the target of this raging wild beast of an empire. But in point of fact, actually, it is weak. And it is dangerous, but it is weak. And this is actually an opportunity to support the heroic resistance of Iran. I mean, Iran is like, kind of helping suicide by the axis of resistance. I mean, a few more people, a few more countries joining now. And I think, it's bedtime for Bonzo here. So
this is an interesting question, which, if you don't mind, I'll weigh in on again.
Yeah.
I think it goes to what political state do we see after this? So is it the replacement of this hegemonic order with another hegemonic order? It's like that story of, like, you have a rat, so you get a cat to chase out the rat, then you get a dog to chase out the cat, then eventually there's a lion in the house and you're outside. Like, there isn't going to, God willing, there isn't going to be another sort of, because if you look at the UN and the way we discussed it, it was a way of dividing up colonial spoils, really. Yes. And it was rules for dividing up those spoils. Yeah. So the question is, do you need such a thing in a post-colonial order? Because the thing is, I think most countries don't have the energy or the inclination to attack countries on the other side of the globe. Everybody has, like, border skirmishes or, like, land issues at their border. But historically, most people don't try to invade someone on the opposite side of the globe. That's a sort of unique, God willing, a unique colonial enterprise. And so do you need the institutions which are there fundamentally to regulate that enterprise and that colonial order? Because I think what Russia and China are doing is, like, China is cutting off rare earths to America. That makes it impossible to rebuild those radars. Russia definitely owes Iran some shahids, and they're supplying something. And then China is supplying at least precursors and possibly intelligence, which I think is more valuable than a vote in the United Nations.
Targeting,
yes. And then the question is, do we, like people ask, like, why doesn't China do this? Why don't they do basically what America does, but better? And the thing is that China is different. These are sort of different ways of doing it.
About, though.
No, I know it's not what you're talking about.
Not what I'm talking about, though. I mean, I'm not saying, why doesn't China send military around the world to do? No, of course not. They respect sovereignty. They're not interested in spreading their dominance in the same way as a counter empire. That's my whole point, is because they're not. They should actually take the lead ideologically in articulating a different way of organizing our.
But I think they are. I believe they are.
Well, but some people think they are, but it's too mixed for it to be clear and to help people orient themselves.
I think there's a focus on articulation in the West and not action, which I think Benji will get to.
Well, okay, take action then. Let's.
Yeah, but action is taken.
Yes, they should do action. Then then let's have them. Then maybe your demand, Indi, should be, they should get involved militarily.
So,
I'm not.
So there's a number of layers to this. Maybe because, I started out as a Marxist revolutionary, and we always looked upon the UN as a joke and a tool of imperialism. I've never had many illusions in the UN, and I'm old enough to have seen every single vote in the UN Security Council only being implemented when it suited genocidal empire, right? So I look at the result, I look at the outcome. I don't get obsessed by the form. And the outcome is this thing is even worse than the League of Nations. Everybody today makes fun of the League of Nations. This thing has nothing on it. It's just as dirty a tool of imperialism as the League of Nations was. Now, the question is, what do we replace it with? Well, we replace it with the new phase of the international class struggle, which there was the decolonization phase. And I went back to Fanon today, right? And Fanon is very clear. He says, decolonization is when you get the settlers out of your land and then you retake control. But once you do this, you're still inside an imperialist system, right? And the imperialist system is controlled by the imperialists, and since the Second World War, by the US, which is now, turning into this human centipede with its Zionist colony. And that thing is going to make sure that you stay in a state of absolute subjugation. You never invest in infrastructure. Look at the Gulf satrapies. The only thing they invested in, they have all the money in the world. The only thing they invested in was what? Luxury tourism, big world sports events, high rises, show off high rises. But did they invest in food self-sufficiency, in health for everybody? They don't care. They have 90% of slaves in there, right? None of the things that make you be able to control your own life, to like a human who can control what they do, the food they get, how they organize their day, the fun they have. That's what sovereignty is. Those countries never had it, right? And you've had a few countries, interestingly, civilization countries that have been around, that have a social nature that has been around for thousands of years. You have China, you have Iran, that have found the way to be sovereign, right? And to develop. And in fact, the more you isolated them, the more they became sovereign. That's the case with Iran. It's obvious. And China went all the, super Sun Tzu, and went to hug its enemy so close so as to make sure that the enemy couldn't kill it. And in passing, just a small matter, not kill the rest of humanity with it. And we're still at this stage. You can't do revolutionary war, class struggle the way you could before. Imperialism could put an end to life on the planet, like at the push of a button. Did you see the guy in the White House? Do you remember who he is? How he, the kind of person he is? So the thing is how you boil this psychopathic frog, and you always have to think it's a psychopathic frog. You have to remember that. Abundance of caution is probably not your worst quality at this particular point. If you gave it to me, I'm impulsive, I'm emotive, I would probably go, that's enough, let's go and, put this thing to death now. But at the moment, it's going as well as it could. When these genocidal empires collapse, you can see it, we can see it. It's all over, bar what? Bar the increase in genociding, because that's the way they go out, right? Now, the task for the adults in the room is to make sure that increased genociding doesn't go, doesn't cross the threshold over the end of life on the planet. I actually think it won't. And one of the things that will make it not do that is that very stable position of, I'm thinking of China in particular, to say, no, the rules are good, the rule book is good, the charter is good, but really, we can't have it in New York. Like, those guys are too crazy. We can't, we can't have vetoes for crazies. And they're gonna go at it a little bit like this, little by little. And when China puts a veto, they put action behind it. They put real material action behind it. But at the moment, they've put all the material action that the Iranians need. Have you heard a single, top Iranian commentator saying China are not up to the task? I listen to them, and my understanding is between the lines is like, whoa, those guys have our back. So I'm willing to trust them. And then one last point. What is our role as Westoids in the West? That's not for brother Indi, of course. It's not to tell the enemies of empire what they should do or what they shouldn't do, or how they should do, how they should vote, when they should fight, in what way, with what weapons, what ceasefire they should sign or not sign. That is not our place. Look, we are supposed to take care of our own Epstein class, and we've been absolutely atrocious at it for over 100 years. So let's, climb down a little bit from all this thing. They should do this, they shouldn't do that. What is our role? Our role is very simple. It's to legitimize the armed resistance to this genocidal empire. If you want to be really brave in the West, don't go China bad, Russia bad, or whatever.
That's not what we're doing here.
I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I'm talking more generally, right? What we should do is go, Sinwar good, IRGC brilliant, Hezbollah, the greatest guerrilla force in the history of the universe that you've ever seen. Those guys, you thought that Muhammad Ali was the rope-a-dope genius. You'd never seen Hezbollah in your life, right? The Zionists actually believed these guys had been defeated. They had nothing left, nothing in themselves. You even have, our friends at the Cradle criticizing Hezbollah all the time. So the Zionists could say, yeah, even the pro-Hezbollah folks think they're all on the ropes. And then suddenly they rise, and the Zionists are. And you know what? This time China won't replenish their adult diaper supplies. And that's what they're doing materially to help the struggle. Not to mention the exquisite targeting. Did you see how the targeting improved since between June and now? Thank Comrade Xi Jinping for that, because that's all you need.
I don't know if it's that, but I don't underestimate the Iran's indigenous stuff, but I guess they don't have indigenous satellite.
Yeah. Maybe it's Iran, then even better.
Should we get to some war, guys? Because it's popping. Can I read you guys a quote from the Air Force commander? He said, "Ask CENTCOM." This is I think, is Lebanon doing this? Yeah, I think this is Hezbollah doing this. Yeah, but this is the IRGC saying, "Ask CENTCOM to show you the before and after satellite images of Iranian missile and drone strikes on the Al Dafra, Ali Al Salem, RIF and 5th Fleet bases. It's truly spectacular, and the show will continue."
Could you repeat the last bit?
It's truly spectacular, and the show will continue.
Well, here we go.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, so to narrate this, Hezbollah has launched its largest rocket attack with over 100 launches targeting Haifa and other northern areas. According to Israeli media, several impacts were made and there were several injuries. And also to remind everyone, yeah. Oh, yo, yeah. Yeah, guess you can turn into falafel.
Okay, of course, the obligatory, now we have to run. Okay. Yeah. This is now, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Benji, because and
is he gone? Did we lose
him? They got him. Yeah, they got him.
Oops, and now they got David. They got Indi.
They got me also.
If you're the last one, man, carry on for us, Benji.
You guys gotta keep going.
I get the dog.
Keep firing.
Yeah. So that raises a really interesting, something that's been a kind of a question for me over the last 18 months was the framing of Hezbollah accepting the so-called ceasefire that turned into 15,000 violations and attacks of various kind over the last 18 months as a major defeat, and that they had been kind of crushed, and that their military capabilities had been dramatically reduced. And the fact that they adhered to this ceasefire for 18 months while these violations were going on seemed to stretch any credibility that they might have had of maintaining some kind of military capability, and seemed to keep confirming over time, like as time went on, that perhaps they were a spent force, right? And so this involvement, entering into the war, has been truly remarkable and just absolutely destroyed that narrative. We could talk a little bit about this attack. I really think that it's a very interesting one, this 100 missile barrage and what they've revealed with it. But fundamentally also the political point is a really important one, that I think what it revealed is what some of us said and thought at the time, which was that it really was more about the internal domestic political situation within Lebanon that had led them to this ceasefire. It wasn't because of a military kind of loss in the field, in a field of battle. This was, of course, the impression people had because of the dramatic loss in the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, which I admit felt worse to me in some ways than the Khamenei one, just because emotionally I just wasn't prepared. He was such a charismatic kind of figure. His speeches are incredible. Everybody would wait for, the next Nasrallah speech, it was just like big news. And the Israelis were always waiting, like, what is he going to reveal, and so on. So the fact when he departed, it led to this impression, over dramatic impression and misanalysis of what actually was going on, to underemphasizing the fact that Hezbollah was presented with a very difficult internal political situation where they couldn't rely on support within Lebanon in the established government. The situation is actually worse now, because after Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah's death, these politicians who never dared to denigrate Hezbollah and say some of the racist and bigoted things that they do, or openly cozy up to Zionist talking points in the direct sort of way that has started to happen over the last 18 months, and more recently with the call for disarming, Hezbollah, and putting pressure on them to do that. That's actually very instructive to know, that's the real reason. And so what we've been witnessing them, reveal is not only capabilities equivalent to or similar to previous, period in their support front, in the Lebanese support front, but new capabilities, new missiles with bigger, warheads and longer range that nobody knew that they had. Nobody could imagine and conceive in this context that they would have preserved. Why didn't they? If they had them before, why they didn't use them? They were keeping them back. If they didn't have them at the time, how is it that they've managed to develop it under this kind of circumstance and situation where Syria has been lost and easy kind of flow possibly between Iran and Lebanon was cut off, supposedly? Like, all of these were presented as obstacles, and now are mysteries for like how exactly they have done this. But what they did with this attack, with 100, I just want to say this, is like they called it the Asfin Makul, which is the chewed up straw. And that's what it's, the operation is named, the chewed up straw, for like, what is the consequence of their missile attack. But interestingly, the previous verses of the Quran, this is the surah, the elephant, that are, have you not heard about the Alam Tara Kayfa Fa'ala Rabbuka bi Ashabil Fil? Have you not heard about the companions of the owners of the elephants? And then
Shall I read it? Shall I read? Oh, you got it. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Yeah. If you
it says, "Have you not seen how your Lord? Have you not seen how your Lord dealt with the people of the elephant? Did he not foil their strategy and send against them flocks of birds, which pelted them with clay stones?
Swarms of winged creatures." Okay.
Yeah. Thus he made them like stubble cropped by cattle, or chewed up straw, which is fascinating because it harks back to what Sinwar said. Like, it'll burn stubble, it'll burn green and dry.
Yes. So what the agent, so this refers to an episode known as the events that happened in the Year of the Elephant in the pre-Islamic Arabia, where the Aksumite kind of governance in Yemen, so this was, a kind of proxy regime, or sort of controlled by the Ethiopian political state centered in Aksum, sent an army to purportedly to destroy the Kaaba, right? The black cube that you've seen pictures of and is the object for pilgrimage during the Hajj season, to destroy it. And like, everybody was panicking. They fled the city. The prophet of the prophet's grandfather, was, had flocks of camels that were taken by this army. And he showed up to Abraha, the general who was leading this army, to sue for, return of his animals. And Abraha said, "What? You're like worried about some camels? I'm coming here to destroy the Kaaba and destroy your city." And he said, "Well, that is the house of God. It belongs to God. The camels belong to me. So I'm here to intercede for them. God will take care of his house. Don't worry. That's not my affair." So it's a little bit like, let's stay in our lane. He was like, I'm here for my camels because that's what I have, responsibility for. That's God's house. God will protect it. And so then what ends up happening, according to the, histories, legends, is that a swarm of winged creatures, sometimes characterized as birds, but they're described as not actually birds. They're just winged creatures, assailed this army, this vast army, with clay pellets. And they had this kind of like destructive effect. They were like some weapon of mass destruction, or they were these missiles that they were unexpecting. Like they did not expect that these like swarm of birds or winged creatures would devastate them by throwing these small little pellets, right? And so I think the reason why they called this is not just because of what they expected, the devastating effect and consequence of their barrage of missiles, chewed up straw, because that's what the last verse describes as what happened as a result of this, is that they were just left as like chewed up straw or cut down, stalks. But it is also the unveiling of a capability that nobody expected or believed possible. And of course, it's going to be theologically understood as divine, and Hezbollah's, they mean, the name is Party of God, and it's referring to a verse in the Quran, Hezbollah hum al-ghalibun, the Party of God will be the victors, right? So they're, of course, referring it to that way, but I think it also has this meaning of, a stunning, unexpected revelation of a capability, that is actually, very devastating. And so that's, I think.
Let me give you a perspective from within Israel. This is some guy, Ori Goldberg. He says, "I don't think we've had this many sirens indicating salvos launched from Iran and Lebanon in the wee hours since Israel's criminal war of aggression in Iran began. We have no real way of knowing what has hit where. It doesn't really matter. Israelis are rattled."
If people are unaware of who Ori Goldberg is, Ori lives in Israel. He was formerly on the Mossad anti-Iran team. He's a scholar of Iran who applied his knowledge to the dark side. And for whatever reason, within certainly the last few years, he's become one of the very few Israeli Zionist voices just like coming out and saying it. And his posts, I consider them to be like really crucial. And for example, maybe about a year and a half ago, he was describing what it's like to live in a genocidal society, but on a day-to-day basis, where you walk out into the hall and you look at your neighbor, and just looking in their eyes is like an out-of-body experience. And so I think his perspective is really unique right now. And also he's dealing with cancer treatment. And I think it's really a beautiful thing that people have been sending him a lot of love on social media. And one might think, well, fuck Zionists right now. I don't have any sympathy. But the fact that Ori, as a lone individual, and he himself has said, there's probably only a few hundred of us in this entire country who are open anti-Zionists. The fact that people are willing to forgive him for his Zionism, if you will, and his, we can talk about ultimate forgiveness maybe later. But in this moment, I found that to be heartening. And humanity still persists, despite the depredations of the Zio-American Empire. But if I may, I just want to elaborate a little bit on some of what everyone has been saying so far about Hezbollah's sort of dramatic shock return. I sent out, there's this great it comes from WWF, but I've been sending it out, and it's like Hezbollah versus Israel right now, and you've got the one WWF guy in the casket, and the other one comes up to see if he's actually dead, and then it's on, I just like to make a couple of points here related to the points that have already been made, and that is just first, and in no particular order, but just the issue of Syria. This is the law of unintended consequences. We thought that by putting like in Takfiri, Salafist, Daesh, Al Qaeda freak in as the Syrian president, that somehow the arms flow would lessen to Hezbollah. In fact, to my knowledge, let's just say it dramatically increased because of the desperation of Syrians simultaneously with the drawdown of American forces at places like Al-Tanf, which was placed there to prohibit such transit, right? So anyway, there's that. Syria in a way became easier. In terms of the new surprises that Hezbollah has unleashed, some of these toys we had already seen before, but I believe that the Zionists and the Americans either forgot about them because, again, the United States of amnesia, or they just wanted to pretend they didn't exist. But I think most significant is the Almas 3, which is also, it's a reverse engineered spike. And essentially what this is an anti-tank, anti-personnel missile that is guidable and that has a very high resolution camera. And so it can be fired and be guided by visuals all the way to a target. And those targets could be on the other side of a mountain, a tank sitting in a valley on the other side of a mountain, and you fire it off here. And then, whether you're wearing like, AI goggles or your screen, you just guide that puppy right in. And we have seen several Merkava tanks taken out at the zero line. That Israel isn't getting into southern Lebanon. They're fighting at the zero line. So there's that. Then furthermore, the targeting of Hezbollah with their medium and long range rockets has been absolutely stunning. And I hope people saw the radar array that was taken out 160 kilometers south of the border. And if Indi wants to weigh, I don't know if that was you saw it or, okay. But because I know you have some really cool details, man, and your blog rocks for this stuff. But I was shocked that they actually released a video of someone driving down the road. You can actually see the Google Earth. From Google Earth, you can see the image of where the road, it's like basically right along the road. And this, I believe it was a woman because of the scream, is just driving along, and right when she gets next to this multi-dish array, like the Hezbollah shit hits the fan. And they have already, again, I don't know, it's interesting because this site seems to be very sensitive, but yet this is one of the sites that we've received on the ground video, them walking around, it's totally destroyed, like the impact videos, then the video from the car. So multiply that by, I would say, scores in terms of the targeting. They're not just shooting rockets into, sort of terror rockets. They're not wasting ammo the way that the United States and the Zionists are in Iran, trying to do some bullshit shock and awe. The shock and awe for the Zionists is like, we just took out your entire central Israel radar array. So I think that is significant. And then last, I'll just say in terms of big picture, check it out, folks. We drank our own Kool-Aid. We huffed boomer fumes out of a bag again, right? Air power was going to do it. Those Hezbollah guys with that cool pager tag, man, they're all gone. They're just kicking rocks and sulking. And we're going to use air power 15,000 times to violate our own ceasefire. And we're just going to drill them into the ground. Well, I'll remind you of Scott Ritter's little anecdote about pouring concrete and basically empty buildings. Every one of those Israeli bombing attacks over the last 6 months, I wondered, what are they actually bombing? Are they bombing the thing that Hezbollah dug out and sort of, look, we're digging here, man. It's so difficult to dig out. Oh God, is that what they've been bombing this entire time? And this last 100 missile strike, I think, illustrates that Hezbollah, they are true masters of deception. One last element that I just wanted to comment on, and this is just from what I believe I have observed and interpreted, but I really believe the plan after Nasrallah was assassinated and much of the leadership was destroyed in Dahia. Again, the Dahia doctrine, part of that air power, the Hanoi treatment regime, that they went back to their roots, basically back, if you will, to the 80s. And that is we are primarily, and if you will, an asymmetrical infantry force, and to focus on those strengths. And I'm just saying at this point, seeing how strong they have performed on the battlefield, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a manned armed invasion of the north of Israel with 5,000 at least, ass kicking guerrillas who totally seize and hold down that area. So that's complex because Israel has a lot of that. They've got thermal as well as night vision. It's difficult, but who knows how extensive the tunnels are of South Lebanon and whether they'll just be able to pop up at the zero line. I'll remind people, if you've been following the Ukraine war, Russia has done this countless times. The Ukrainians just refuse to even remember their own recent history, because Russia several times now has utilized existing pipelines to enable soldiers to go, in some cases, 10 kilometers behind the line and pop up behind the line and seize. They've done this in Avdiivka, and they did it in the Kursk reconquest. And so what I'm saying is, prepare for more surprises from Hezbollah. And I just, in terms of losers, this last thing, I just, because it bugs me, but everybody, and I know there were so many in the United States who thought that pager attack was just so fucking cool, that terrorist pager attack that blew the hands and the eyes off basically couriers and lower level members of Hezbollah. Many of those members are on the battlefield right now, some of them blind, some of them looking through one eye, some of them pushing buttons with the one fucking finger or nub that they have. And this is in your face, Zio American Empire. So enjoy the show.
So I wanted to, you mentioned Ori Goldberg, and is a very interesting character, by my lights, and because I'm a kind of student of the Tower Bet, I think, a good settler is a settler that leaves the place. But anyway, he is facing health issues and all the rest of it. But Ori Goldberg put out this super interesting concept from the inside, and he said, the settler society, the squatter society, has become solipsistic. Solipsistic is this really weird view that you can get to if you do too much skeptical philosophy, or really high powered cannabis, high in THC, where you think there's only you in the world. There's no one else. There is only you in the world. You have no proof that there is anyone else, so there's only you in the world. And Ori describes in some of his tweets that how squatter society has become literally like this. There is only them left in the world. There is only them. And when there's only you, you don't even think about, everything else is just a problem that you can solve by swatting it. That's why you get 97% of the population supporting this suicide by AOR inside the entity, right? But it's very interesting psychologically speaking, because it insulates you from everything. So it actually gave the colony a staying power that, if I'm honest, none of us predicted in advance. We thought it would just collapse because of all the rifts, the political rifts between the liberals and the crazies and all the rest of it. But actually, no, because it's become collectively solipsistic. I'll stop pronouncing that word. But what's very interesting with that solipsism is, first, the other guys say, this person is like, thinks like there's only them in the world. There's nobody in the whole universe. And of course, it goes with all the, the Chosenite theology and eschatology and all the rest of it. But it's had this effect, going back to our job, which is to legitimize the resistance and delegitimize imperial colonial adventures, is that today everybody and their brother supports Iran. Everybody in the US supports Iran. The other day, I was seeing a client. When I see clients on Zoom, I take the flags down, and I forgot to take the flags down, right? Oh. And I'm seeing my client, and my client says, "Oh, is there an Iranian flag behind you?" I said, "Oh, yes, it is." Sorry. And I go, "Yeah, I don't like, I don't like flesh-eating baby borderers killing people on the other side of the world." He says, "Yeah, I'm the same." But I mean, it's a very small thing, but what are the chances, really? And then I said, "I'm sorry, I took it down because it's not my place to have a flag when I do psychotherapy." But this says something. The job of legitimation of the resistance, the legitimation of white empire is being done, and this is what we must do. And on the other side, the task is for this egg not to be broken from the outside, not even by us, the well-meaning anti-imperialist. The task is for the egg to break from the inside. So I went back to my friend Fanon, and I have some things I wanted to read about that, right? And in the beginning of Wretched of the Earth, the first chapter is about violence. And violence, why did you say violence? The dog is going forward. Let's see. Violence, that's a little bit violent. Yeah, it is a little bit violent because you don't get rid of these demons without kicking them out, because violence is the way they've been stepping on your neck. It's like, it's the way they've been having no dialogue with the dagger on your neck. First chapter about violence, and then goes to violence in the international context. So I'll read a little bit about the violence, which is decolonial violence, where he says, to the expression, and this goes back to the solipsistic point, because to the solipsistic settlers who are all alone in the world, all the natives are the same. And now I'm reading from Fanon, right? To the expression, all natives are the same, the colonized reply, all colonists are the same, which is why they legitimately say, if you support us, get out of our land. When the colonized subject is tortured, when his wife is killed or raped, he complains to no one. The authorities of oppression can appoint as many commissions of inquiry and investigation, and not in Fanon, UN committees and all the rest of it, as they like. In the eyes of the colonized, these commissions do not exist. And then the second part says, okay, once you're liberated, you're still inside this imperialist system. And he describes it. He says, the colonial countries, I'm adding, including the Gulf states, the formerly colonized territory is now turned into an economically dependent country. The former colonizer, which has kept intact and in some cases reinforced its colonial marketing channels, agrees to inject small doses into the independent nation's budget in order to sustain it. And these are your Gulf states. These people literally have to pay people to come to their place. And so does the Zionist colony, by the way. And he says, the anti-imperialist movement must be neither capitalist nor socialist. He asks, why neither capitalist nor socialist? The third world must not be content to define itself in relation to values which preceded it, which is why the Iranian revolution has the form it has, by the way, comrades and brothers and sisters. On the contrary, the underdeveloped countries must endeavor to focus on their very own values as well as methods and styles specific to them. The basic issues with which we are faced is not the unequivocal choice between socialism and capitalism, such as they have been defined by men from different continents and different periods of time. And this to me is a beautiful articulation of what it means to have the egg crack from the inside. And in a way, whatever the extra costs, I would say they guarantee that this revolutionary movement of final anti-imperialist liberation of the region, which for the energy reasons that we know is actually the key region in the world imperial system, has, historically speaking, in Marxist terms, to be done from the inside. But that doesn't mean that the people outside, like China and Russia with all its faults, aren't supporting it in the way that it needs to be supported. But this idea that it's done from the inside, so us on the outside, our job is just to clear the way and to stop our colonizers, throw sand in the war machine, throw sand in the ideological dehumanization machine, othering of the natives, and on the positive side, build full legitimation for their own self-determination and their right to resist and to put all those colonial soldiers in the box ASAP.
Praise the Sun. Sun has some bangers in the comments. They're saying an egg cracked from the outside is food, an egg cracked from the inside is a new life. If I may add something from Nasrallah, because like Marx, he has sort of a quote for everything for me, and even like while dead, I think he's still ahead of us all in terms of analyzing current affairs. So this is from 1992, after his predecessor was assassinated, which is basically in the job description of Hezbollah General Secretary. He said the path pursued by the martyred Sayed was not his own personal policy, but that of Hezbollah's leadership. This path does not shift or change, neither before nor after one Secretary General goes, and a new one comes. And he continued, we of course believe that the Israeli enemy has not achieved any of its objectives through this assassination except for one, namely the removal from the scene of a personality of the caliber of Sayed Abbas Musawi. What they have done, in fact, is awaken that very scene, put it on the alert, sharpened its awareness, increased its determination, unified it even further, caused it to rally around the resistance, and increased its enmity towards Israel in a manner that Abbas Musawi himself could not have done during his lifetime. And then this is one thing which speaks to what Benji is saying about our role. He says, it is not acceptable that the resistance or anyone fighting for his land shall be defined as the aggressor, while the enemy applies pressure to prevent a counterattack. This is not fair. And then finally to what David was saying about, they're ready to walk to Jerusalem. He said, this is in 92. He said, the long-term strategy of the Islamic resistance is clear and does not require additional explanation. It involves fighting against Israel and liberating Jerusalem, as well as Imam Khomeini's proposal, namely ending Israel as a state. We are not unrealistic. We do not pretend that our military capabilities and the numbers of our mujahideen would be enough to regain Jerusalem. None of us have ever made that claim. We do, however, believe that the resistance has to finish the job it started. It is impossible for us to fight the Israeli enemy through traditional and classical methods, but rather we must fight through a war of attrition, whereby we drain its energy, weaken it, and one day force it to withdraw. And he's saying he didn't make these claims in 92, but I'm with David in that I think certainly within our lifetimes, and God willing, by 2027, we will see Radwan force ground troops within occupied Palestine. And it's important to understand that the resistance has boots on the ground inside Palestine, and the empire does not have boots on the ground inside Iran. So we are in very different strategic positions.
Yeah.
Yeah. One topic that maybe we haven't talked at all about is any of the economic kind of dimensions and consequences of the suicide.
I've got a couple.
Yeah, I think there's.
Go ahead, Adnan, but just that's something I had written down.
Yeah, sure. I'll turn it over to you. Just I want to put out there that those are pretty important, and the computing AI attacks, the threat to Google, Amazon and other companies. So there's a lot of potential economic damage here. But one thing that I wanted to put forward, I said this principle of reciprocity is very important. And I want to, say that when we analyze what we're talking about in terms of the economic pressure that Iran's, control over and interdicting of commercial traffic through the Straits of Hormuz, or its threats against, these data centers and the corporations that are investing to, you do all this AI kind of stuff in the Gulf. The principle that they're operating on is insisting on the importance of reciprocity. That is, for example, if we shared this, Ali Larijani, who is the head of the National Security Council, essentially, of Iran, and is as we learned last time, is a Kant scholar and has written 2 books on Immanuel Kant's philosophy and other things, and is a deeply kind of learned and serious person. Not because he studies Kant and all of that. I mean, he could study a lot of different philosophers, but he's a trained philosophical scholar, right? And he said the Strait of Hormuz will either be a strait of peace and prosperity for all, or will be a strait of defeat and suffering for warmongers, right? You choose, world, what you want. You belligerents can choose, and the rest of the world. He wrote this in English, in Chinese, in French, in Farsi, in Arabic, and in Russian. Okay, so he published this for the world to recognize the principle that the Islamic Republic of Iran is operating on, which is reciprocity. Okay, we are as good as you. Our lives matter as much as yours. If we're going to be made to suffer, you will suffer. Okay, so do you want to learn a lesson or not? This is essentially the point that he's making, which is, you know, that there's a price to be paid. And I think in some sense, this is what they're doing here, is that they are incentivizing doing the right thing. Okay, you don't want to do the right thing because you fear the US is going to come down on you. We can make it as painful or more painful than your fear of that threat by, cutting off the gas and the oil. So your energy costs will go up. Your economies will suffer because you're making us suffer. Iran has suffered for decades under sanctions with no one saying anything about it. All of us, if we weren't demonstrating in the streets, we are now having to pay a cost because we made them suffer unjustly. And they are now turning the tables and they're putting pressure on us. And so when we talk about all these economic dimensions and it's going to be very difficult and all of that, they are extracting through the principle of reciprocity. And they're giving you a choice. You can do the right thing. Stop this war, lift the sanctions, stop invading Lebanon and guarantee its security, and stop genociding the Palestinians. You do the right thing, then you won't be made to suffer. But we are now in a position where we are going to make you suffer as well, for these in these situations. And so the last thing that I wanted to say about that is that, this is something our buddy Sina, who was here last time, had this tweet: in the span of 10 days, Iran managed to inflict the same regime of sanctions back onto the entire world, a planet that watched as the Iranian economy was suffocated for a decade by a brutal Zio-American siege. Good, we deserve it. This is what we have to pay. And so I pointed out that this is security for all or security for none. This is what they're doing. And they're saying sanctions for none or sanctions for all, right? That's the kind of principle that I think we have to understand. What is their strategy and tactic is insisting, we are equal. We are equal. And reverse the colonial logic that says it's okay for people in Iran to suffer. It's okay for people in Iran to be bombarded. We can tolerate that. What does it matter to us? Okay, they're saying actually this world is connected.
This French journalist even said on television, "Oh well, it's the mullahs,
Well, and also some people think, oh, okay, and also like, what do we care if the Gulf gets like destroyed? But what's that to us? That's far away. They are pointing out you created this global system, globalization. That is also the vulnerability. We are actually part of one world together. And if you're going to make us suffer, it's possible you will suffer. We could prosper together, or we can, fall together. So let's prosper together. All right. So they're incentivizing doing the right thing. And here's my rejoinder to all the things that you were saying about China and Russia don't have to do this. Well, they're going to suffer too. Maybe not Russia, because they've got a difference there, but China is actually going potentially to suffer as well. They don't want this war to continue. It's not good for their economy, right? I mean, but it's the US that is going to suffer after the Gulf and Israel the most, and Europe. It's the West that's going to suffer because, if these Gulf countries, they don't have like their money in the US banks and corporations. I mean, that's what's been floating the US economy for the last 30, 40 years, is that they made that bargain after the oil embargo. They said, okay, well, we'll provide you security, but you can't do stuff like that again. And all the money that you make, you have to keep in Western banks. And we get to use that for our projects and all that. That's starting to fall away.
And we can see it tomorrow if we want to.
Yeah,
It's going to be a big change in football as well. I think so. What
Oops, sorry.
So what Saeed Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran, has said, U.S. officials are posting fake news to manipulate markets. It won't protect them from the inflationary tsunami, or you could say flood, they've imposed on Americans. Markets are facing the biggest shortfall in history, bigger than the Arab oil embargo, Iran's Islamic Revolution, and the Kuwait invasion combined. And it is huge. And one thing important to note is, well, first off, Adnan, what you said about incentivizing is very important. For a long time, the global structure was to incentivize people who did wrong and went along with wrong, and to punish those who did right. And Iran, that's why I say it's a strategic victory already, because they are changing the global incentive structure. They said quite clearly, if you kick the Americans and the Israelis out, your oil can go. And I think they've exported more oil than usual, and China is actually getting its oil pretty fine as far as I can tell.
Okay, well that's good.
Yeah. So the incentive. That's why I say this isn't like Vietnam or Afghanistan where they're just getting kicked out and then they go on to do it to someone else somewhere else. First off, they haven't been able to set foot in Iran except to get captured, and they're not going to be in a position to do this to someone else. This guy Aurelian, who I'm actually not a huge fan of, but he said what the West has and has had for some time now is a single-shot military. One serious campaign, whether finally won or lost, would disarm the West for a decade. And I think that's being generous. I would say disarm forever. We are getting, as in they will not be able to rebuild without Chinese help. And racially, they just cannot conceive of that. So then it's not going to happen. But the incentive structure is changing. And I think the world who follows along needs to maybe see that and get with the good guys.
So bridging a couple of points here, incentive structure, reciprocity, Araghchi's statements. Yesterday, I believe it was yesterday by our time, the Zionists and or the Americans bombed Sepah Bank. This is a strategy. The Zionists went straight for the banks in Gaza, either looting them or just destroying them. And so the minute that happened, Araghchi put out a statement that pardon my French, we're going to fuck you up too by blowing up your banks, HSBC, Bank of America. We can see you from Bandar Abbas right there with your shit-eating grin in Abu Dhabi or in Qatar, and so it's on. I don't know if what bank they've taken out, if they've already done that, but you can bank on when the IRGC or Hezbollah says they're going to do something.
You can bank on it. That's a good one.
You can bank on it. Also, Indi mentioned the fact that not only is China getting their oil, but Iran is now selling more oil than it ever had before the war began. Furthermore, and this is being reported, and I've got personal anecdotes from friends I've talked to now. Finally, the rial is actually now doing better, not worse. Okay, so those are two in sort of a micro.
Winning does things to you.
Now, in terms of the big picture, and this is what I wanted to talk about, and if people want to then comment on things sort of in between the minutia of a couple of tankers leaving and the rial going down, and then this is the big picture that I've been realizing, the specter of the decline of American empire, certainly let's just say in the Persian Gulf, irrespective of whether the Zionists are ejected in the next few months or years. What's going on in the Gulf? Just briefly. The entire petrodollar system developed after the 73 oil crisis is predicated on a agreement whereby, and this is primarily with Saudi Arabia and Pahlavi Iran, but of course then it applied to all of these family regimes of the Gulf. They must price their oil in dollars. Receiving those dollars for their oil sales, they will buy two things: American debt and American big, beautiful weapons. Not that they don't get to use themselves. They don't have the inventory, but they're just going to stockpile the shit and pretend that they have stuff and say, ooh, how cool, we have this stuff. Look at what we have just witnessed. The United States not only moved its troops off the bases, but they moved them into civilian areas of these cities and their broader environs, making their civilians a target. They've pulled their air defenses from the Arabs and given them to the Jews, if you will. That is to who really matters, the Zionists. The South Koreans are shit out of luck in that context as well. And actually, South Korea kind of relates as an adjunct here because it is part of the petrodollar recycling system, at least insofar as it buys American debt, it buys American weapons, it helps underwrite its own occupation in South Korea. So where am I going with this? I'm just, because I teach a class on it's the politics of oil. Some students might have taken it like it's of the history of the global petroleum industry from its beginnings through the present. One of the things that I lecture extensively on is the advent of and the complexities and details behind the petrodollar system and petrodollar recycling. What we've seen here is that the United States, in broad daylight, like reneged on all of its commitments under these agreements. And there is actually an explicit agreement that was signed between the Nixon/Ford administration, 73, 74, and the Saudi government. The ramifications of this are as such. We already had Saudi Arabia selling oil in yuan to China. That alone is grounds for a coup, being murdered by the empire, right? As Saddam tried it, Gaddafi tried it, like breaking from the petrodollar system. The shit showing, if you will, of the United States in this war so far, and the obvious interest in defending the Zionists over anybody else, including American soldiers and citizens back at home. This is the perfect storm, if you will, especially, and follow me here, the Iranians doing whether they survive or not, these Gulf regimes a favor by destroying the American military presence and literally sending them packing. Iran has created, if you will, if not a new Gulf world order, a new Gulf order, insofar as I don't believe there's, as already stated, I think Benji stated, that they're not returning to those bases. Those bases are gone. We'd have to rebuild them. But this would also be reliant on the complicity and cooperation of the family despotic regimes themselves, saying, you know what, we want to be punked again by the Zionists and the United States of America. So here's several more $100 billion to rebuild a system that only really serves to keep us in line. And when the shit hits the fan, isn't there to protect us. So I don't think, even as Norm, and this is on Norm Finkelstein, not me, but he talked on Mario Nafal the other day about the retardedness of, and he dropped the R word, the retardedness of the UAE. I don't think Emiratis are even retarded enough to fall for that one. Because what was it again? Fool me once, shame on, fool me. You can't get fooled again.
Yes.
I think even Emiratis
don't underestimate Emiratis, man. These are like spoiled.
Okay,
Well, showing your age here,
I will
guys.
not underestimate them. You guys have been right on that. My estimations in the past, right?
Yeah.
I told you, man. It's like them discovering sovereignty. It's like my dog driving the car. Like once a bitch,
Right,
always a
right.
bitch. Sorry.
But so just to conclude, just briefly, folks, this is huge, because here's the deal. Not to like bum anybody out, but the amount of printed American dollars that have been held abroad in banks to buy energy resources has dropped from, at one point, it was in the 70 percentile. So that is 70% of all dollars that have been printed by your government have been held abroad in foreign banks to buy energy resources, because the petrodollar system was a global system that enabled the United States to have the exorbitant privilege, as it was called by a French diplomat, of just printing its own money and buying its own resources. I believe we are now down to, it might even be lower, but I think we're at like 50 or even in the 40 percentile, right? So folks, this is how this works. It's just supply and demand, okay? If I have a hot dog business and I send out 1 million hot dogs around California and people are loving them, then I'm making money off my hot dogs. But what about the day when my hot dogs aren't cool anymore and I get 1 million hot dogs back here in Highland, California? Guess what? I can't fucking give them away. And that is really, inflation is too much money in the system, okay? And listen to Richard Wolff and Michael Hudson talk about that, because I'm just a student of them. But I do know through my study and teaching of the petrodollar system for a long time, let's just say that this is what undergirds American empire and the ability for the United States to engage consistently in foreign adventurism and do things like print $5 trillion to give to people and corporations during COVID, and continue with its quantitative easing, and do a fucking $1.5 trillion budget for the military, which is only a 50% increase over the already shocking trillion. And just last little digits here, folks. We're at the above 39 trillion now in debt. We pay more than $1 trillion now just to service that debt. And we don't have the money, so we're just putting it from credit card to credit card. So this is how, with a black swan, if you will, a perfect storm for the US dollar. And this hits where it hurts. This hits at the core of the system, the petrodollar system that enables the United States to continue to maintain the global reserve currency. Very, very significantly, President Xi of China recently came out and stated explicitly that he would like to see the yuan as the global reserve currency. So I'd say on this level, in terms of the global economy, on as well.
One note about the Z thing.
one.
It was released recently. I think he said it in 2024.
As one of the yeah, he said as
It was a
one of
speech
the
that was just
currencies
released.
because
Really? That's that's significant, because I had a student who might even be watching now, hey Svet, who was like, no way, did he say that? And I was like, yeah, he just said it. And
He
I sent him the
said
link. So
as
that's
one.
really significant. That's really significant, actually.
if I may say, he said as one of the reserve currencies, which is fully in line with what China is talking about. It's a common future for humanity. Wow, David, that was amazing. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That's like free college, man.
Those
I should
things
give you-
needed to be said. And looking at the big picture from, this empire in this latest form, if you like, in this late form, doesn't administer anything except two things. One is finance. So that's the dollar system. And the other one is narrative, which it enforces with violence, right? And those are the two things it holds on. Like they've refined the art of imperialism to the point that they don't even need to know what's going on in your country or anything. They can find satrapies by printing dollars, and they can smash a shitty little country against the wall every 10 years just to show who's boss. This is kind of how it works. And this is how they, by the way, deindustrialized, right? Because it's not the imperialism of Lenin's time where you had this vertical integration of industry and finance and then looking for territory and places to do that. No, they're not interested. They're fracking everything. They just want to do money, to hold the money, the financial instruments, which at the end of the day, the derivatives, I probably said it before, but they're narrative. They're just stories about what you think might well happen in the past based on very complex modeling of dynamic systems. And that's the only two things that are holding this empire, right? And their weapons have been financialized. So they're not as good on the battlefield as the other one. They've themselves disappeared into bubbles of narrative. They've become solipsistic, so they can't see the other guys on the battlefield. And I was listening to Charmaine Nawani today, and she has this thing about, she's the one who came up with the boiling the frog thing for the Zionist entity, right? And I added boiling the psychopathic frog because I'm thinking of this kind of human centipede being the US empire and the Zionist colony. I actually don't believe one can survive without the other at this particular point in time, because if you look at the way, even financially, and this is not anti-Semitic, but like 75% of the financial control of US empire is Zionist, and that's just the way this cookie crumbles. So if you get their precious little colony to collapse, I don't know how this one is going to work. People back home will take the pitchforks out. So, what are the two pillars of the Zionist colony, according to Charmaine? One is the narrative that we're the poor victims, and the other one is the ability to bring people to flow in, right? So that they can maintain this artificial demographic majority. They already don't have the demographic majority anymore. They've been, hemorrhaging people for the past 2 years, and they were even before that. And victim narrative. Every grandma in the US, listen to these British grandmas. They'll tell you how they see them as victims, right? So it's Jova for the precious little colony and to boil the imperialist frog, you need to take out its financial control. And Saudi, I think, are selling most of their oil now in yuan, and so are Iran. And the other one is the narrative. And the narrative, where, when your chief of narrative operations is one Donald J. Trump, thank you for your attention to this matter, Esquire, you're skating on super thin ice. And I want to go back to Brother Fanon, because the way the People's War is fought, and this is a People's War. This is a People's War for the liberation of the region. I think these borders will all disappear. Iran is a country, so it will keep, and a civilization will keep its border, but for the rest, it will not look anything like we've seen since the colonizers chopped it off. It will be decided by the people of the region, as it should be. And Fanon writes, in the armed struggle, there is what we could call the point of no return. It is almost always attributable to the sweeping repression which encompasses every sector of the colonized population. So Brother Indi gets his news from the Quran, very good source, and I get the news about what's going on from Franz Fanon here, right? What happened in Gaza, do you think, right? It's like exactly that violence, that repression that encompassed every sector of society, and it really, they passed the point of no return. And this is why people like, the Zionists were only tolerated on the land. They have to ask permission, and they didn't ask for permission. They became solipsistic. So the smart Zionists, the liberal Zionists, wanted a two-state solution. I mean, that's such a great deal. 80-20 is the best deal ever. But no, not for the solipsistic, because they're white supremacists. And the tit for tat, the reciprocity in the violence is how the colonized affirms their humanity over the dehumanizer. It's an absolutely central point. Okay, you do this to me, you know what? You're not alone in the world. I get a vote. I get a vote also in a fight. And I'm going to do exactly the same to you. You know why? Because I am the same as you. I am equal to you. So you're going to get exactly, if not more, the same punches that you give me. And you know what? You can't take punches. You've never taken a punch. You have XF coming on, and we're kicking them when they're down, and that's as it should be. And it's not a fair fight, and that's as it should be. The minute they're in a fair fight, they literally soil their adult diapers. And so back to Fanon, and I'll conclude on this other piece I found today. For the colonized, this violence is invested with positive formative features because it constitutes their only work. This violent praxis is totalizing, since each individual represents a violent link in the great chain, in the almighty body of violence rearing up in reaction to the primary violence of the colonizer. Factions recognize each other, and the future nation is already indivisible. The armed struggle mobilizes the people, i.e., it pitches them in a single direction from which there is no turning back until Al-Aqsa.
That's a very interesting military point. If I can interject something from Clausewitz. He says, war is such a dangerous business that the mistakes which come from kindness are the very worst. The maximum use of force is in no way incompatible with the simultaneous use of the intellect. If one side uses force without compunction, undeterred by the bloodshed involved, while the other side refrains, the first will gain the upper hand. That side will force the other to follow suit. Each will drive its opponent towards extremes. You can see that that's sort of the reciprocity concept that Iran is trying to impress upon the empire, which they're not getting. So we end up with the end result of what Clausewitz said, the end result of war is one person effectively disarms the other. You break their will to resist. And it's funny watching the stuff coming out of CENTCOM now, or out of the US, either it's like AI generated slop, or they're saying, look at how many boats we destroyed. It's like, bro, the boats haven't even entered the battle. You just blew up some fishing boats. And they've also said we've destroyed so many missiles. And it's like, yeah, by running into them. That's like saying like you destroyed like my fist with your face. And but there, and Iran is consciously, methodically disarming them, and not disarming them in Iran because they can't get into Iran. They're disarming them, I think, forever.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's another component of this suicide by axis of resistance, is that empire is being disarmed. They can't make and produce as many missiles and, interceptors and everything as they need, which is why these reports of the United States and Israel, being potentially open, i.e. they're eager for a ceasefire, is precisely because they want time to recharge and try this again. Like, they feel that the fight, talk, mode is of benefit to them, because every time they come back, Iran under sanctions is dealing with more, kind of economic difficulties, and there's more possibility for discontent within the society, and that they can then, fight and finish them off. But what they don't seem to understand is that, the capacity to resist that Iran has shown goes up when they are attacked. It's less, in some ways, when they are just constrained by sanctions, because that creates generalized misery that it's less clear and obvious the source of that. And there are, and they can also see, as Dave and I did, that, down, what's the famous street? I've already forgotten, Dave, like the
Valley Asr.
Valley Asr, yeah. That, you could be on there with all of these like beat up old, Iranian made under the fiat kind of factories that were abandoned, that they've taken over, and continuing to indigenously produce, automobiles, but some kind of beat up ones because you don't always get the parts. And then somebody is driving by in, nice Mercedes coupe. Where did that come from? I mean, that's because of corruption in the sanctions. That's what sanctions create, is these opportunities for some people to enrich themselves because they have connections, with the government. They're able to, use the sort of black market to enrich themselves. And people,
they spread corruption in the land and call it peace. Sorry.
Exactly. No. Again, another great verse from the Quran that they, yufsidu fil ard, they spread yusfik dima, so they spread corruption and shed blood, call it peace. Yes, indeed.
And they make a desert and call it peace too. That's the other thing they do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the capacity for resistance, however, has simply increased dramatically, and that I think is the real index of power right now, right?
And
talking about weapons. Go ahead, Dave.
Can I just like on that note, and I guess we're getting on to beyond the 2 hour mark. This might be my final comment, but I want everybody, you three gentlemen and our audience, to behold something. Okay, let's take a step back and behold something. Iran has been under sanctions essentially for 47 years, but in terms of the really stringent sanctions, these began around 2012, and then of course maximum pressure kicked in 2018. Okay. Because Iran was placed on the list of states that sponsor terrorism, essentially 6 months before Iraq was taken off that list, it has been unable to acquire dual-use technologies and all kinds of things, and especially under the sanction regime. Behold what's going on right now. Iran alone is, in my view, kicking the shit out of countries, and like from Israel to the United States of America to all of these family regimes and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, who have been, pardon my French, but on the teat of the world economy, at the center of the world economy for decades. They've had access to anything on the planet, including Chinese, rare earths. They've got the university industrial complex, including my own, just behind them, supporting them in their imperialism and their suicide death cult with the Zionists. And Iran, with its own indigenous resources, its own brain power, its own technologies, is in the process of kicking the shit out of them and has the global economy by the balls like that. Make no mistake who is in the driver's seat right now. So let's get back to Estekbar. This is arrogance, hubris of like epic, if you will, proportions. And the more shit they talk, the more just stupidity and retardation and like 14-year-old like Hollywood's movie terminology that they employ. It's just making it worse for them, and it's just making me laugh that much fucking harder. And pardon me, but again, let us remember Kurtz's last words. I just digress for a second, okay, folks. What he said was, they won't allow young men to write the word fuck on the side of their airplane when they are trained to drop fire on people. So let's just remember what is obscene. What is obscene is 175 dead girls at a school hit by Tomahawk missiles that are fucking like president is denying and blaming on the Iranians, just like they blamed the downing of Iran Air 655 on the Iranians. Yes, they blamed that on us, that we killed our own, that it was Shiites. They were going for like a suicide ramming of the USS Vincennes, the poor guys on the Vincennes. So this is like epic just desserts, and it was earned. This beating has been earned by the Zionists and the Americans and their minions, and the beating being delivered has, if you will, been earned by the Islamic Republic of Iran, which through decades of hard work and paying attention and studying their enemy are completely surpassing them in virtually every way. And like, certainly somebody could say, oh, well, Dave, like Iranians are dying. Yeah, they are just like Vietnamese died, just like Algerians died. And guess what? The imperialist, to paraphrase General Giap, like the imperialist is going to go home after we win, irrespective of how many of our civilians you kill. So that's not a metric of success. Pete, whether you want to call him Kegseth or Heg's death, as Max Blumenthal came up with the other day, I want to see that guy hang and or suck on his gun, because he is going to be, next to Donald Trump, the biggest abject loser that humanity can behold. It's already happening, but I don't know if he's realized exactly what he has participated in bringing himself to. And
I guess if we're going to close, I'd like to close with some stuff from the Iranian regime. This is a quote from Major General Mousavi, who was martyred. He said, there will definitely be, so if this is 6 years ago, he's saying there will definitely be counterstrikes in such a way that he cannot free himself from this. It is his hand to take, but it is no longer his hand to let go. And again, they're saying that before this happened. So, and then this is Major General Rezai, who said this again before this war popped off. He said, if we set out, there will be no more talk of ceasefires or anything like that. We are telling you this now loud and clear. The blows you have landed, the damage you've caused in the past 50 years, no matter our magnanimity and strategic patience, you have failed to heed it. And then this is the Iran's parliament speaker, Ghalibaf, speaking from yesterday. He said, we are absolutely not seeking a ceasefire. We'll believe the aggressor must be struck in the mouth so that it learns a lesson and never again thinks of attacking dear Iran. The Zionist regime sees its disgraceful survival in the continuation of the cycle of war, negotiation, ceasefire, and then war again, in order to consolidate its dominance. We will break this cycle.
Yeah. Excellent.
Absolutely perfect. That's exactly what they're trying to break, is the fight, talk cycle. And have a new strategic reality. And as somebody put in, citing Justin's recent sitrep, the disarmament, as we were just talking about, disarmament of the empire, but disarming greater Israel as it exists now. And I think it's a very important point to recognize that greater Israel already kind of had been existing through the Abraham Accords, through the security arrangements, the ring of U.S. bases and defense systems and all that, all throughout the region. So we're seeing, hopefully, the dismantling of that. Benji, do you have any kind of conclusion?
Yeah, I want to finish on a completely apocryphal quote volunteered on Twitter today by an account that I've discovered recently, but who's been really fine with the analysis. Is called Americanets and at Ripple Brain. I put it in the chat. But sometimes he makes it's a pretty good shit poster, and when he goes breaking, it means it's just making it up. So breaking, IRGC announces now that the idea of Dubai has been killed in its physical manifestation, it is up to each and every one of you around the world to search inside yourself for the internal Dubai, the spiritual Dubai. Locate this Dubai and destroy it forever, as the IRGC didn't say. But it is exactly the same with this genocidal death machine. We at RIF Podcast, by the way, someone asked where you could see more of Indi. So Indi is doing the streams with us on Monday mornings, 9:30 a.m. ET, and we do also a lot of shows, but they're not live. This empire is not long for the world. It is not agreement capable. It is not negotiation capable. It is not able to take yes for an answer. It is not ceasefire capable. So it needs to be put out of its misery. It needs to complete its suicide by the axis of resistance. And popular liberation struggles are battles of wills. They are battles of, as Martyr Al-Araj said, of societies, of collective consciousness. And our collective consciousness must, individually, what we must do to strengthen our collective consciousness is to locate in each and every one of us, inside ourselves, for the internal dominance, the internal survival of empire, the spiritual survival of empire, if you like. Locate that place in your mind where the empire is going to survive this one through one of its cunning plans and destroy it forever.
Amen. Yes. Well, first, of course, I just want to remind everybody that we're always supporting the Samir Project, and especially during this month of Ramadan, we've been raising money for the Ramadan campaign of the Samir Project. I've put the link in the chat a few times. You know where to find them. Try and support and help. Of course, we always remember Palestine, just like Sayyid, the supreme leader, martyr, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. I had the opportunity to talk with a good friend, well, a recent friend, but a really good comrade and friend, Helia Doutari, who we've featured her reporting on the ground in Tehran for, an Al-Quds Day remembrance of the legacy of his support for the people of Palestine, the cause of Palestine. And he talked about the principle of reciprocity as well. He mentioned how, with the help of the Islamic Republic, they had helped transform the stone in the hand of the Palestinians. Think of that as like maybe those swarm of winged creatures just having a little pellet, the swarm, the stone in the hand of Palestinians into a rocket. And he said, a rocket, saruch ila jawab saruch, a rocket as an answer to a rocket, right? To the rocket, right? So parity and reciprocity, that's what they tried to help, is uplift the Palestinian struggle so that the resistance could fight on more equal terms, with their occupation. So that's, but the other thing that I just wanted to mention, Iran's people will just not be defeated. We have to really believe that. Everything we've seen suggests that. The people outpouring into the streets, we've been talking about that. But I asked Helia how she was doing. She said, of course, we're concerned. We're like living in this war. We're being bombed. She said, but it has been so incredibly inspiring and powerful. And what I want to say is these are people who, through resistance, are fully alive. They are alive, okay, because they're looking death in the face without fear, and taking the example of Ali Khamenei. That's just so powerful, and that's just so inspiring. And the fact that they, and what we've witnessed for 2.5 years of the Sumud, of the Palestinians, this cannot allow us to get depressed or down or inactive. What we have to do is take the knowledge that we've been talking about, and as Benji said, normalize the resistance, legitimize the resistance against this empire. So that's what I kind of want to conclude on and end on. But I think maybe as we go out, I don't know, it's 2 minutes if people have the patience for it. I just thought this was also another example of parity and reciprocity beginning at the cultural level, in the Kulturkampf, in the psychological war. This amazing video here, the story of the election of the third leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran. A new
this is the Lego propaganda network.
The Lego one.
Movie.
Nice.
Let's just take a little look at this, because this is such a great irony, but not only is it hilarious in turning the kind of Hollywoody commercial toys and consumer consumption of Western culture, which is like Legos. I mean, this, we're not talking about Hochkultur anymore here, where it's Legos.
Yeah, and Legos are literally made out of petroleum. They may have a crisis making them if this isn't resolved.
That's it. No more Lego. The West is really in trouble.
That's the end of Western civilization right there.
Right. So here, let's just, a little bit from this. Maybe we won't watch the whole thing, but at least let's watch a little bit.
There's Reza Pahlavi, represented by the ketchup bottle. Mashallah.
Mashallah, yes. So, with that, good friends, comrades, I wish you all peace with justice and solidarity to you all. It's been a pleasure being with you, gentlemen. I look forward to talking with you again soon. To victory, inshallah, soon.
Free Palestine and victory to the free people of the world.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.